The Villain Wrangler by Little Hawkeye 3. Chapter 1. Budding Idea. Danny Johnson stared blankly at the screen in front of him. Earlier, his reaction had been to shock, but that had faded away by this point. Sadly, that didn't mean the contents of the email displayed on his laptop were any different. 5-year-old girl, Melody Waters, wants to show Poison Ivy her succulent garden. Terminal cancer. A few months. It wasn't the fact that the girl had cancer or how young she was, but more the fact that her world of wish revolved around her notorious and wanted villainess in Gotham. That surprised Danny. This job wasn't new to him, but he had never heard of anything like this happening before. "Kids are strange," he muttered, rubbing his palm against his forehead. How was he going to give this child what she wanted the most? His search began online, scouring enthusiast forums and potentially illegal sites alike to find any word of where one might come across the Green Woman. He ignored any stories that reminded him of her criminal actions. None of that mattered after the point he learned of the wish he was sent to fulfill. That was how he found himself seated in Gotham Park every night near the Botanic closure for a week, in the hopes of catching Ivy. The first 3 nights had passed without events. The 4th night, Danny could have sworn a figure was watching him from the trees, and the last 2 had seen drunk individuals stumble along the paved walkways. He was hoping that the final night would grant him the opportunity he'd been waiting for. If not, he would search for another idea. The feeling of something wrapping around his ankle snapped him out of his thoughts, to leave him meeting the emerald gaze of the person he was looking for. Poison Ivy raised an eyebrow in question as she sat on the other end of his bench, watching with a dangerous glint in her eyes. "You're quite persistent," she hummed, pursing her lips and reaching one hand toward his face. "Kept me from visiting my babies for several days, you naughty bo—" She was cut off as Danny grabbed her wrist and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, Miss Ivy, but I need to ask you something, and I'm racing against the deadline," he said, tensing himself for an altercation. "Make that 2 now." Her warning was clear, and yet it didn't faze him in the slightest. He reached into the pocket of his trench coat and pulled out a folded packet of papers, all revolving around wisher Melody Waters, her past, current picture, her wish statement, details on her sickness, and a drawing she had made of Poison Ivy. Danny handed them all over to the woman, who took them questioningly. "My name is Danny Johnson, and I work for the World of Wishes Foundation. Last week, a terminally ill 5-year-old named Melody Waters asked to meet you, so she could show you the small garden of succulents she has been caring for in her hospital room. She adores you." He smiled as he saw Ivy ruffle through papers, confirming what he said. "I'm here to ask if you'd come to see her at Gotham Central." He watched as she glanced between him and the papers she held several times before chuckling humorously. "I'll give you points for effort, Mr. Johnson, but your time is up." Even with the vines now wrapping around both his legs and his chest, Danny found her theatrics slightly ridiculous. "Why are you really here? Was it the commissioner or the bat?" He knew he shouldn't, but Danny couldn't keep his annoyance down. "Look, Ivy, the only damn reason I am here is because a dying little girl's biggest wish is to show you her own plants. I don't care what the hell you do the other 364 days this year, but that other day is going to be spent in Melody's hospital room in the next week." The 2 sat in silence for several minutes following this outburst. Danny wasn't really sure what to expect, but seeing the vines constricting his movement had stopped creeping upwards, he felt optimistic. In an attempt to not be rude by staring, Danny turned his sights on their surroundings until she spoke. "Well, I must make sure those poor darlings are being cared for correctly," Ivy finally answered, flicking her wrist to remove Danny's natural constraints. "I'll be there. Won't tell you when. Can't take too many risks." "Understandable." You'd best be on your way then, Mr. Johnson. Not all of the nightlife in Gotham is as nice as I am." With that, Ivy rose from the bench and began to walk down the flower-lined path, stopping every so often to lean down and stroke the blooming plants. Danny let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding in before shaking his head and wandering off towards his apartment. The first day passed with Danny working from home, going through his usual task of writing to celebrities and corporations on behalf of other children and their wishes. It was nice to pretend he hadn't had a chat with an infamous temptress the previous night. The universe didn't seem to share the same sentiment. He'd only been out of the room for 10 minutes to take a shower, 15 at most, before walking in with a towel wrapped around his waist to find Poison Ivy seated on his couch, aimlessly flipping through the TV channels with his remote. Danny opened his mouth to say something and wasn't proud with what actually came out. "What the hell?" His face flushed in his embarrassment as she coolly glanced over. "What channel number is National Geographic?" Danny blinked several times as he processed her question. Try 615-ish, he replied lamely, before shaking his head several times to clear it. "No, wait, what are you doing here?" Ivy stared ahead at the television as it showed scenes of some foreign rainforest. "Needed a way to contact you. Brought you a burner with my number on it." "That's thoughtful." She finally looked over at him and smiled. "Of course, and I'll be giving you a 5 minutes heads up before I arrive." "Thanks." Ivy ignored him as she stood up and began to make her way towards his door. "You leaving out the front?" he asked, surprised. The redhead looked at him incredulously. "You're 19 stories up. Did you think I came in through your window?" With a parting wink and smile, Ivy walked out of the apartment and shut the door behind her, leaving an exasperated Danny behind. "Johnson!" Danny looked up from his burner phone that Ivy gave him and sighed as he saw his boss stalking towards him, arms crossed. She glared at him over the top of her glasses. "What do you think you're playing at?" Her heels clicked menacingly against the floor as she stopped in front of him. He chuckled and scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not sure what you mean." No, he knew exactly what she meant, and the twitch of her eyebrow confirmed what was coming. "Telling a sick child that she get to meet Poison Ivy? I don't pay you to make up this crap. You honestly think some evil plant bitch would show up?" Her eyes grew wide as a vine wrapped around her mouth, effectively cutting off her rant. Danny did his best to keep up a professional face and not laugh, but a few snickers managed to sneak out at the sight of the goosebumps appearing on her upper arm after Ivy ran her hands on them. "Danny, you didn't say there would be any weeds here," she murmured, brushing a strand of the woman's brown hair out of her face. Danny could see her trembling and decided it would probably be best to stop it before something bad happened. "Ivy, I think Melody's ready to see you," he said, gesturing behind him towards the girl's hospital room in an attempt to redirect her attention. Thankfully, it worked. Ivy sighed reluctantly before removing her hold on his boss and moving in to stand beside him, ignoring the woman as she half ran back down the hall. "All right, rules. No attacking anyone. No offering to kill anyone. And no killing or guarding." The redhead looked offended like that he would even ask that, but didn't comment. "I guess we can go in then." The light that came into Melody's eyes as she looked up from her crayon drawing to see Poison Ivy walk through her door would stay with him forever. She squealed and wiggled up to sit up further, smiling so brightly it was almost blinding. It was amusing to see her joy contrasted by the fear on the faces of her parents and the doctors in the room. "They told me you weren't going to come," she said happily as Ivy took her tiny hands in hers. "But I knew you would." Danny could tell the smile on Ivy's face was real. "I just had to come see my little flower." She sat down on her bed and asked to see Melody's drawings, prompting a flurry of conversation from the girl. Excuse me, mister, Melody's mother said, speaking softly so not to interrupt her daughter's focus. Danny looked down at her curiously. She had tears welling up in her eyes. I haven't seen her this lively in so long. Whatever you did to find her. She glanced over her shoulder towards the villainess. Thank you. That was the moment Danny knew he would continue to do whatever it took to fulfill any child's wish, no matter what. So the next day, when he received a request from a child wanting to meet Captain Cold, he did what anyone would do. Pour himself a strong drink and start searching online for the rogue's favorite bar.